The moment he smelled her perfume, his fingers stopped moving, not slowly, not uncertainly. They froze mid-signature, as if his body had recognized something his mind was too afraid to name. The boardroom continued around him, papers shifting, chairs creaking, someone clearing their throat. But the world had already narrowed to that scent. Soft jasmine, warmed by vanilla, and something impossibly familiar beneath it. A fragrance he had not encountered in 20 years. A fragrance he had once believed he would die remembering. Jin-woo lifted his head and saw her, standing quietly near the far end of the conference table, clutching a leather folder to her chest. New higher orientation badge still clipped neatly to her blazer. Professional, composed, a stranger to everyone in the room. But not to him. No, not even close. For a moment, he forgot how breathing worked. A dull roar filled his ears. Because 20 years ago, that same scent had been wrapped around the only person who ever pulled him back from the edge of death. He didn't speak for several seconds. The executives exchanged confused glances. Jin-woo never hesitated, never lost focus, never showed emotion inside these walls of glass and steel. But now his hand trembled just once before he quietly set the pen down. "Let's end here," he said, voice steady enough to fool everyone but himself. Chairs scraped back, files snapped shut, people filed out. She stayed, polite, waiting, unaware that the man she was about to introduce herself to had just been thrown 20 years into the past. When the room finally emptied, silence pressed in. She stepped forward first and bowed slightly. "Director Han, thank you for taking the time. I'm Amara Williams. I just transferred from our Singapore branch." Her voice, older of course, but underneath it the same softness, the same calm. He stared at her a fraction too long. She noticed. People always noticed when Jin-woo looked at them. His gaze carried weight. But this wasn't authority. This was disbelief. "Welcome," he managed. The word felt fragile, like it might shatter if he spoke any louder. She smiled politely, the kind of smile reserved for new workplaces and unfamiliar hierarchies. No flicker of recognition, not even curiosity. Nothing. And something inside his chest tightened. Because if she didn't remember, then that night had only changed one life. His. After she left, Jin-woo remained standing at the window long after the skyline dissolved into evening lights. He rarely allowed himself to think about the boy he used to be. Seventeen. Drowning in expectations he could not meet. Grief sitting permanently behind his ribs after his mother died. A father who spoke only in disappointment. Back then, silence had felt safer than breathing. Until the night he stopped trying altogether. Rain had fallen without mercy, cold enough to numb thought. He remembered the river black, restless, endless, and the certainty that stepping forward would finally quiet everything. He had been seconds from disappearing. Then, a hummed. Small, fierce, grabbing the back of his coat with surprising strength. "Don't," she had said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just one word. But it cut through the storm. He had turned, and there she was, soaked to the bone, hair clinging to her cheeks. Terrified, but refusing to let go. She smelled faintly of jasmine. He remembered thinking it was strange noticing perfume at a moment like that. But trauma brands details into memory. She didn't lecture him, didn't ask questions. She simply stood beside him in the rain until the shaking stopped. And before leaving, she pressed something into his palm. "A reason," she said gently. "Find one, even if it's small." Then she disappeared into the night before he could even ask her name. He searched afterward, for months. But people vanish easily in cities that large. Eventually, he stopped looking, but he never forgot the scent. Never forgot the warmth of that brief human defiance against his despair. And now, she was here, walking his hallways, breathing the same air, completely unaware she had once been the dividing line between his life and his death. Sleep abandoned him that night. By morning, he had already memorized her personnel file. Transferred internally. Top performance reviews. No disciplinary history. No mention of Seoul 20 years ago. No trace of that night. He told himself it shouldn't matter. People save strangers every day without expecting to be remembered. Still, why did it feel like standing in the presence of something unfinished? Days passed. He watched from a distance he pretended was professional. She worked with quiet focus, laughed easily with coworkers, sometimes hummed while organizing documents, alive in ways that made the office feel less mechanical. And every time she passed him, that scent followed, gentle, unrelenting. Memory made physical. He wondered if she knew what it did to him. Of course she didn't. How could she? To her, he was just another executive. But to him, she was the ghost who had unknowingly built the man everyone respected. The first time they spoke alone after that meeting happened by accident. Or what he later suspected was fate growing impatient. The elevator jolted, then stopped between floors. The lights flickered once before stabilizing. She let out a small laugh. Well, this is new. He pressed the emergency button. Calm. Controlled. Inside, however, his pulse had already accelerated. The confined space filled quickly with Jasmine. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then she glanced at him. You look like you've seen a ghost. He almost said, I have. Instead, he asked quietly, have you ever lived in Seoul before now? She tilted her head, thinking, for a short time. When I was a teenager, my mother worked here briefly. The air seemed to thin. Do you remember it? Not much, she admitted. Just rain. And the river. I used to walk there when things felt overwhelming. Something cracked open inside him. You helped someone there once, he said, before caution could stop him. She blinked. I'm sorry. A boy, he continued softly, standing too close to the edge. Her brow furrowed. And then, a subtle shift. Not recognition exactly, but the sensation of a memory brushing past. I tried to help someone once, she said slowly. I never knew what happened to him. Silence fell. Heavy. Electric. He swallowed. That boy was me. The words barely rose above a whisper. For a heartbeat, she simply stared. Then her hand flew to her mouth. No. Tears gathered in her eyes faster than she could hide them. You're alive. Not successful. Not important. Alive. As if that alone was the miracle she needed confirmed. You saved me, he said. And for the first time in decades, Jinwoo felt 17 again. Exposed. Terrified. Grateful beyond language. She shook her head quickly. Tears slipping free. I didn't save you, you chose to stay. He let out a fragile breath. I stayed because you handed me a reason. The elevator hummed back to life, then almost intrusively, and resumed its climb. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Because something irreversible had just surfaced between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. Human to human. Seoul to Seoul. After that day, distance became impossible. Not because they tried to close it, but because awareness changes everything. Conversations stretched longer. Silences grew comfortable. He learned she carried guilt for years, wondering if the boy she stopped had found his way back to the edge. She learned that every major decision in his life traced back to that night. He built his company believing survival deserved meaning. Neither said what trembled beneath the surface. Until one evening, months later, as snow drifted quietly beyond the office windows. I looked for you, he confessed. For years. She smiled faintly. I'm glad you didn't find me then. He frowned. Why? Because you needed to become who you are, without feeling indebted to a stranger. The word stranger lingered. He stepped closer. You've never been that. Emotion flickered across her face, quickly masked. But he saw it. The same fear now lived in both of them. Because gratitude, when it grows long enough, begins to resemble something far more dangerous. Hope. The confession came without rehearsal. I don't know where gratitude ends, he said quietly, and where something else begins. Her breath caught. Neither looked away. For the first time since that rain-soaked night, he was the one standing at an edge. And stepping forward meant risking everything. She reached for his hand. Warm. Steady. You don't owe me your life, she whispered. He closed his fingers around hers. I'm not offering it because I owe you. I'm offering it because, somewhere along the way, it became yours anyway. Tears blurred her smile. Outside, the snowfall thickened, muting the city into something softer. For a moment, the world felt impossibly gentle. Two lives, once separated by chance, finally aligned by time. Yet neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, a man lingering beneath a street lamp, studying them with quiet intensity. Because some pasts do not stay buried, and the night Jinwoo nearly lost his life was not as simple as either of them believed. Not even close. They found each other again, but neither knew. Someone else had been searching too. Snow continued to fall long after the office lights dimmed. Inside, the warmth between them felt fragile, almost sacred. Jinwoo had spent 2 decades believing that night by the river was the closest he would ever come to being understood. Yet here she was. Not a memory. Not a ghost. Real. Breathing beside him. For the first time in years, The quiet inside his chest felt like peace instead of emptiness. But peace has a strange way of making us forget that life rarely closes old doors without opening new ones. And some doors should terrify us. A week later, Jinwoo invited her to dinner. Nothing extravagant. Just a small restaurant overlooking the Han River, the same river that had once nearly taken him. He chose the table deliberately, not to revisit pain, but to honor survival. Amara noticed immediately. "You remember everything," she said softly, watching the dark water ripple beneath the city lights. "I remember the moment my life divided into before and after." She looked down at her hands. "I used to wonder about you, for years." His chest tightened. "Why didn't you search?" She hesitated, then answered with a vulnerability he had never heard from her before. "Because that night, I wasn't supposed to be there." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She inhaled slowly, as if stepping back into a version of herself she rarely allowed to surface. "My mother and I were leaving the country the next morning. She had just accepted a job overseas. I was angry, terrified. I didn't want my life to disappear overnight." Her fingers traced the rim of her glass. "So I ran out, walked for hours in the rain. I remember thinking, if everything was about to change, I wanted one last night that still belonged to me." Her eyes lifted to his. "And then I saw you." A quiet stretched between them. Not heavy, just full. "You were crying," she continued, "but not loudly. That's what scared me most." It was the kind of silence that felt final. Jinwoo swallowed. "Some memories never soften." "You didn't try to talk me out of it," he said. "I knew words wouldn't reach you," she replied gently. "So I stayed." Sometimes presence is louder than persuasion. He watched her, struck again by the quiet strength she carried so naturally. "I kept something from that night," she added. His breath stalled. From her purse, she removed a small object wrapped carefully in tissue. Inside, a thin silver lighter, worn with time. His lighter, the one that had slipped from his pocket onto the rain-soaked pavement when she grabbed his coat. "You dropped it," she said. "I didn't know why, but I couldn't throw it away." Emotion rose so quickly he had to look toward the river. All these years, a part of him had remained with her. Unknowingly, unbroken. "You remembered more than you thought," he whispered. She gave a faint smile. Maybe memory doesn't always live in the mind. Sometimes it stays in the hands. Something shifted inside him then. Not gratitude, not relief. Something deeper. A realization that terrified him in its simplicity. His life had not only been saved that night, it had quietly been tied to hers. Winter softened into early spring. What grew between them did not feel rushed or dramatic. It unfolded with a steadiness that made both of them feel strangely safe. Morning coffees turned into long walks. Long walks turned into confessions. They spoke about loneliness, about expectations, about the strange ways survival reshapes a person. And slowly, Jinwoo began to understand something he had avoided naming. He was no longer looking at the girl who saved him. He was looking at the woman he was falling in love with. The realization frightened him, not because it felt uncertain, but because it felt inevitable. One evening, as they walked beneath trees just beginning to bloom, he stopped. "I think my life has been moving toward you for 20 years, he said quietly. Her eyes shimmered not with surprise, but with recognition, as if every step was leading back to that river. She searched his face. "And if we had never met again?" He smiled faintly. "Then some part of me would have always been unfinished." Her hand slipped into his. And this time, neither pretended it meant nothing. Weeks later, he took her back to the river. The air smelled of rain again, softer now, almost nostalgic. He stood at the exact place where despair had once blurred his future. "I used to think this spot was where my life almost ended," he told her. "But now, it feels like where it truly began." She leaned against him gently. "You were always meant to stay." He reached into his coat pocket, removed a small velvet box. Her breath caught instantly. "Amar." His voice was steady, but his eyes held the same vulnerability she had seen in that boy long ago. "You gave me a reason to live when I had none. Now, you are the reason my life feels full." He opened the box. A simple ring. Elegant. Unpretentious. Like the love that had grown quietly between them. "Stay with me," he said. "Not because you saved me, but because somewhere along the way, you became home." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could answer. "Yes," she whispered. And just like that, two timelines finally became one. The wedding was small, intentionnel, filled with warmth rather than spectacle. As Amara walked toward him, sunlight spilling through the chapel windows, Jinwoo felt something he once believed impossible: peace without fear, joy without the shadow of loss. When she reached him, she smiled the same way she had that night. Calm, steady, fearless. 20 years ago, she had pulled him away from the edge. Today, she met him at the beginning. And as they exchanged vows, Jinwoo realized something quietly profound. Some people enter your life for a moment and end up rewriting your entire story. Months passed, their home filled with laughter, with quiet mornings, with the comforting rhythm of two lives no longer walking alone. One evening, while sorting old documents, Amara discovered a folded note tucked inside a book she had carried since adolescence. She opened it slowly. The paper had yellowed with time. Her own handwriting stared back at her. A reason to stay is sometimes waiting for you in the future, even if you haven't met it yet. She blinked, emotion rising unexpectedly. Because without knowing it, she had written those words the night she met him, as if some part of her already understood. Their lives were not intersecting by accident. They were aligning. Years later, they would return to that river again, this time with a small child between them, her laughter carried easily by the wind. And Jinwoo would watch them both, still stunned by the fragile chain of moments that had led here. One rainy night, one outstretched hand, one scent carried through decades. He would often think, we spend so much of life fearing the unknown, never realizing that sometimes the unknown is where our future is quietly waiting. And every now and then, when Amara passed him in the hallway, that faint trace of jasmine lingering in the air, he would pause, smile to himself, and remember, the night he almost disappeared was the night his forever began. Some stories don't end with survival. They end with something far rarer: being found,